Now, something I know everybody wants to talk about. Seems like everywhere I go, everybody wants to talk about Griffin and Riggs, what's going on at the North Carolina Supreme Court. Hi, and welcome to the debrief. We're going to cut through the spin and get right to the truth. North Carolina still struggling to put roofs over heads from hurricanes, but not just Helene, Matthew and Florence. Why is all this disaster relief taking so long? We're going to get into it. But also, the battle over the elections board is heating up in court. Stein and top lawmakers going head to head, clashing in court. We'll have the details on that. And the new state auditor is digging into the books. What's he finding out? Well, hit like, follow us, and join in. We are going to find out. Okay, I'm Donna King, editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Of course, joining us, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, and CJ's managing editor, Jeff Moore. Okay, let's get straight into it. First, years after Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Matthew, families, believe it or not, still do not have a roof over their head. It's been like a decade. There's a new bill to really try and speed up that recovery and finally clean up this mess. What's your take on this? Drop a comment below because we want to hear from you. Mitch, tell me what you think. We're talking about a decade of people living in hotels.
It really is amazing, and this is something that's been a problem for a number of years. Obviously, if you, within the first months, even the first year after a hurricane, if there are some issues getting people back into their homes, that's somewhat understandable. But as the years go on and they're still not back in, you see that there's some sort of problem.
Right.
Part of it is the federal government and the way that it operates, but a lot of it is the state government. And as Carolina Journal has reported, a big issue has been the office that was set up to deal with these issues, the NC Corps.
Sure.
And ever since lawmakers really decided to take a close look at this, they have been hammering the NC Corps people about getting stuff done and getting it done in a more timely way, and every time they bring in the folks, it seems like nothing more had been done.
Right.
And so it's going to be interesting to see whether this new initiative will actually make something happen in the eastern part of the state. And of course, this is all informing what's happening in the western part of the state as we deal with all of the issues from Helene and trying to ensure that we don't end up with the same sort of situation there that we had in eastern North Carolina.
So now, Jeff, this new bill filed this week in the North Carolina General Assembly by the Majority Leader, Brendan Jones. It's got to be a good sign, right, if you've got the Majority Leader carrying it. This is to help. There's 1,000 homeowners. 1,000 homeowners still do not have houses from Florence and Matthew. So this would put about $217 million from the Emergency Relief Disaster Fund, whatever it's called, to the Department of Public Safety NCORE to complete that home recovery. What's the definition of insanity? Is when you
throwing good money after bad.
Good money after bad, expecting something different. But do you think with the increased eyeballs we have on this, NCORE will be able to finally take care of these last 1,000 people?
Yeah, well, one can hope. And so I think they've named it the Cooper Accountability Act.
Oh, okay.
And so they're really precedent because Roy Cooper was presiding over a lot of these programs that are actually supposed to get this money out. And back when we were just a couple years removed from Hurricanes Matthew and Florence, they started having hearings about how such a low percentage of these disaster relief monies were actually being distributed. I think it was 18 months, 2 years after Hurricane Matthew, they still had like 98% of the disaster relief funds that had not been distributed anywhere. So they definitely want to take this and rectify. I think every time they had someone from NCORE come back to the legislature, the deficit that they were in actually started to get bigger and bigger. And so hopefully this is the end of the line, and this money can actually go in there to fill that hole and make the homeowners whole again after these long years. But now we have an example of what not to do, which sometimes is just as instructive as an example of what you need to do for the relief and recovery efforts in the western part of the state. So we clearly know that we cannot have it managed in this way. So hopefully there are some changes made, and we've talked a lot about that on this program and in Carolina Journal articles, that they get the western part of the state handled much more efficiently than
Sure.
they have eastern North Carolina.
And remember,
Yeah.
one reason why you're seeing a bill like this is because there's a new sheriff in town, so to speak,
Yeah.
at the head of NC Corps. Laura Hogshead was the person who was in charge.
I remember they asked her to quit, and she said
Right,
no.
and she
Yeah.
didn't, but eventually the handwriting was on the wall,
Sure.
and the administration got rid of her. But Pryor Gibson, who's a long-time Politico in North Carolina, former state
Been
rep,
around, yeah.
knows the people, knows how to deal with the General Assembly. He was brought in, and one of the things that he said at one of the recent meetings was, look, here's the amount of money we think we need to finish this job. But even if you're not going to give us that, set a certain amount of money now and give it to this process, because otherwise, not only is the stuff not going to get done, but the contractors we need are all going to leave.
Sure.
They're going to work in Western North Carolina or in other states. We need to know that there's a certain amount of money, even if it's not all the money that we've asked for. And I think 217 million was the figure they asked for. So we'll see if that ends up being the figure. But the key point for Pryor Gibson was, we need to have a firm commitment, or else it's not going to get done, not because of any problems with the organization, but because the contractors that you need will not be there.
Sure.
If there's not money flowing
Right.
into them, they're gone.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I want to know what you think about this. Drop a comment here. Let us know if you think this money really will make a big difference, because it does worry me. It's going to get sucked up by bureaucracy. Now, speaking of which, you will not believe this. The state auditor is digging into the books, and we want to know what he is going to find out. Tell me what you think. The DMV chief out, right?
Yeah.
Wayne Goodwin's
So we have
gone.
Wayne Goodwin's
They're in the middle of
out.
an audit. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, so the DMV is going to be the subject of a performance audit. Corps is going to be the subject
Okay.
of an audit. So Dave Bullock, the
digging in,
new
yeah.
state auditor, appeared before some committees at the legislature, and they are looking to ramp up their performance audits. They do dozens and dozens of performance audits every year, universities and colleges and towns and everything, but they're
Right.
going to start looking into some of the more the third rail items that everyone was talking about so much and wondering what may be going on. They're going to start looking at those things. So they're going to be doing an audit of the DMV. And then when the DMV commissioner came in, he announced that, well, I will not be reapplying for this
timing.
job. So the timing looks suspicious.
Uh-huh.
It also may just be a really tough spot to be the leader of the DMV, which may be the most notoriously inefficient
Sure.
government agency. And they've had problems for years. They seem to fester and get worse. And so they've been trying some reforms. Wayne Goodwin, who's the commissioner there at the DMV, he's a former lawmaker. He's the former chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party and the former insurance commissioner of the Department of Insurance in North Carolina. And so he's got a lot of experience in state government, around state government, in politics, but the DMV was a dragon too big for him to slay.
Sure.
So he's going to be stepping aside, not reapplying for this job, and maybe the person that comes in this job, with the atmosphere we have in the state of North Carolina and nationally with all the DOGE efforts, that maybe you get a real change agent in there
Sure.
that starts to implement some real, and they could be kind of disruptive changes to the DMV system, but that benefit the citizens of North Carolina and all the people that actually have to use the DMV. So they want to, in the auditor's office, just
Sure.
going back to Bullock's office, they're going to be investigating the DMV, Corps. They're going to have a new investigative unit and then a dedicated rapid response team. He mentioned that
I like
before
that.
they may have tips come in from citizens and residents, from lawmakers and people that are kind of anonymously saying, hey, you need to take a look at this, and they'll pull auditors off
So
other
is he like
projects.
going to be our own little Elon Musk?
It seems like they have
Okay.
a lot of energy going in.
Uh-huh.
The office seems to be more active than it has been in recent years. Like former auditor Beth Wood would be in the news often when an audit report come out, and she was viewed as kind of an equal opportunity auditor where she was going after both sides, and so she had fans politically on both sides
Sure.
of the aisle. Dave Bullock,
Dave Bullock, yep.
is coming in with an energy that is, exponentially more, and to actually look under the hood at all sorts of things that we haven't previously looked at under the hood for, and now he's got the Board of Elections under the auspices of the Auditor's Office as well.
Sure.
So they seem to have just a lot of enthusiasm for getting to the bottom of things, and with the surrounding environment, I think you're going to see a lot more news coming out of the Auditor's Office in 2025.
Lawmakers are doing it too. There's an oversight committee that's
Yeah.
going to start digging in as well.
Yeah, so it's like an all hands on deck.
Sure.
And the the tides turn really fast. Like it starts happening slowly, and then all at once you notice the tide has really turned.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you go back a year ago, we seem to have all of these issues on all sorts of different areas in government
Right.
and culture. And now you look at all these different things, and everyone seems to be getting on the same page to really go after and tackle these
Sure.
issues. Efficiency is one of those things. The auditor is going to have a big role to play in that.
Huge, huge. Do you think we've hit critical mass? The public is just not going to put up with this bureaucracy anymore. They want to dig it up. Because Doge is going crazy. You know, Dave Bullock, he's not been a part of the Republican establishment for a while. He's coming in with all of these new responsibilities and new energy.
My first thought was fresh
Yeah.
eyes. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think anyone really has serious concerns about the way that Beth Wood operated
Right.
as auditor. As Jeff mentioned, she basically had pretty much bipartisan support, but she'd been in the job for a while. And so I think some of the agencies got used to Beth Wood will criticize us, but we're going to do the same thing
Yeah.
that we're always doing, and she can criticize us again next year and just repeat the story again. Bullock is new to it. He's going to want to make a mark. He's seen firsthand what happened with the problems with NC Core and sitting through some of those hearings, and so he's looking at it like, okay, now that I'm new in this office, it's going to be my time to step in, make a mark, and make sure stuff like this isn't happening and causing years and years of problems with these various programs. I think this is also something that's being driven by what people are seeing in Washington
Yeah.
with Elon Musk and President Trump and the new Doge effort, thinking, well, why don't we do something like
Sure.
this for state government? We already had, before the Trump team started its efforts, a government oversight committee. We had various groups that are looking into the way that state government operates. But I think there's this thought that, okay, the federal government seems to be on the right page on this stuff. State government, you ought to do something just like what they're doing. So whether it is taking what you have as an existing committee and reshaping it a bit to
Sure.
fit in that Doge mentality, or setting up a new group
Right.
and just having it do what the old group did,
Sure.
that might be a way to get things going.
I'd like to see it. I mean, and I'm not totally sure it's going to be covered even when they start digging things up. Certainly you'll be able to see it here on the debrief. Make sure that you let us know in the comments if you want to hear more of it, because I like hearing these stories. I think it's interesting. I want to know where my money's going. And then, of course, at carolinajournal.com. But the big one, the one that we've been waiting for, the elections fight, is gearing up. It's getting so ugly. So tell me, lawmakers in the courts are clashing with Stein over the state elections board. Who has control over the ballot box?
Well, Jeff mentioned earlier that one of the things in Senate Bill 382 last year was that oversight of the State Board of Elections and the ability to choose the
Sure.
Elections Board members shifts on July 1st, the way things stand now,
Okay.
from where it is now with the governor making the appointments and the Elections Board being sort of its own entity,
Yeah.
to shifting under the oversight of the new auditor, Dave
Sure.
Bullock. So not only would the Elections Board be under his department in terms of where it sits and how they have to operate, but also he would be appointing the board
So
members.
the same guy that we've been talking about digging up all these would now have the election board too.
Exactly, and that
Okay.
was something that was part of legislation passed late last year. There is a lawsuit challenging this. It actually is sort of a configured lawsuit that had already been taking place. There was a case called Cooper v. Berger, where the old governor, Roy Cooper, sued the General Assembly over its plan to change the elections board, replace the 5-member board that has a 3-2 Democratic majority
Okay.
with an 8-member board evenly split between the two parties.
Right.
The governor went to court, got a court order against that. And then the General Assembly said, okay, well, the courts have said no to this. Let's have this new plan. Let's
Sure.
keep the board as it is, but shift it under the auditor. So now Governor Stein, in a case that's called Stein v. Berger, is suing over this, and both sides submitted this week their motions for summary judgment, which for
Okay.
people who don't follow legalese means that they don't think it needs to go to a trial. They think that the 3-judge panel that's overseeing the case can look at all the legal arguments, maybe hold a hearing, and then without having to hold a trial and witnesses can just decide who wins,
Okay.
and then it can be appealed. But the idea is the legislators say, look, we have the right to put new duties in place for these constitutionally elected officials like the state auditor. We're going to put elections under the state auditor. The response from the Stein team is, no, this is the executive power that belongs with the governor. you're allowed to add new duties for the auditor or the superintendent or the labor commissioner, but you can't put something like elections that was under the governor,
Right.
under the auditor. And so it'll be interesting to see whether the three-judge panel and
Sure.
eventually the state Supreme Court agrees with one side or the other. It'll be very interesting to see if this thing gets resolved legally before July 1st,
Right.
which is when this is all supposed to shift, or whether it's going to be an ongoing fight that lasts
Okay,
longer.
where is it right now?
Right now, it's in Wake County Superior Court
Okay.
before a three-judge panel that was, and it's likely to be the same three-judge panel that dealt with the Cooper v. Berger case
Sure.
and ruled in favor of the governor.
Okay.
But eventually, this case will get to the state Supreme Court almost certainly. Whoever loses is going to want to appeal and try to get some sort of ruling one way or another about whether this is the type of thing the General Assembly could do. Now, if the courts uphold this, one of the things that that the Stein people are warning about, and of course they're making it to be
Sure.
the craziest example possible
Yeah.
to show why they don't like this, but they're saying, look, if the General Assembly can do this, what's to say that they couldn't put transportation issues under the labor commissioner or some other issue that has nothing to do with education under the superintendent of public instruction? If they're allowed to do this, put elections under the auditor, what can't they
It's a
do?
shell game, yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what the courts end up saying on this.
Very interesting. Now, something I know everybody wants to talk about. It seems like everywhere I go, everybody wants to talk about Griffin and Riggs, what's going on at the North Carolina Supreme Court. Do you have an update?
Yeah,
Okay.
very quickly. This is in the Court of Appeals right now. By the time people watch this, the latest thing might have happened because the State Board of Elections and Justice Riggs, the Democrat who's ahead by 734 votes, today is their deadline to file their briefs before the Court of Appeals. And then on Monday, Jefferson Griffin, the Republican and appeals court judge and the challenger in this race, faces the final deadline for the final written filings before the appeals court. The other things that happened this week that are outside of that briefing schedule are that Justice Riggs filed two things this week. One was asking Judge Tom Murray to recuse himself from the case.
Okay.
The reason being Judge Murray, his campaign committee donated $5,000 to Jefferson Griffin's legal defense fund.
Sure.
And Riggs is saying, look, you're supporting him in
Right.
this case. You've already made a decision. You shouldn't be taking part. And then the other thing was she wants to have the appeals court hold a rare en banc hearing, which would mean that the entire appeals court would hear the case, not just
Wow.
a three-judge panel.
Interesting.
If that happens, and if Murray recuses himself, and Griffin is already recused because he's an appeals court judge, that would still have Republicans with 10 of the 13 judges, so that they would have a 10-3 majority. Some folks have asked, why does she want an en banc hearing rather than a three-judge panel? My guess is that it's because she wants to guarantee that if there's a ruling in favor of Griffin, that there would be some dissent. Because there's a possibility you could have a three-judge panel that's all Republicans.
Sure.
If they decided to rule for Griffin, they could rule unanimously, and I think she's pretty well certain, Justice Riggs is, that at least one, if not all three, of the Democratic judges would not go along with something that would favor Jefferson Griffin. So that if there's an en banc hearing and the majority were to rule against her, at least there'd be some sort of dissent when it gets to the Supreme Court.
Sure, sure. All right, great. What do you think about this? Does this mean that the way to office kind of runs through the courts? It feels like that's been what's been happening in the last few years. So I guess you got to have a lawyer if you're ever going to file to run for office.
If you're running for elections, make sure that there's someone on your side who's got access to a good lawyer,
Right.
because this is the time of year when they're making their money.
That's right. That's right. What are you watching this week? I know we've got a big oversight committee hearing. Lawmakers want to hear from who's holding the purse strings.
Yeah, as I left to come into the studio here, they were actually interviewing the Secretary of Revenue for the Department of Revenue of North Carolina. They're going to be speaking to a lot of people. We've got a huge slate of kind of oversight and informational meetings where the lawmakers, especially new committee members, are being
Right.
introduced to big stakeholders, government agency heads, the heads of advocacy groups and huge associations.
Excellent. Yeah.
So yeah, they're really getting down to business and we're getting to full swing on Jones Street.
Fantastic. All right, we'll be watching your coverage. Make sure you check it out at carolinajournal.com. But let's keep this conversation going. We really enjoy talking to each other. We want to hear from you. We want to find out what you think, what you want to see us talk about and cover on carolinajournal.com. Thanks for joining us.